It's day 5 of Murders at Karlov Manor spoilers, and today we finally get to see our long-awaited Mole God, and we get what might be the new best ever mono green ram spell in the history of the game, along with a bunch more stuff, which means we should probably break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Murders at Karlov Manor spoilers. So I know, it's the weekend, but spoilers season never sleeps, and that's a good thing, because we have some truly ridiculous cards to talk about today, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking about spicy new Magic cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our awesome sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk Murders at Karlov Manor. First up today, we got our long-awaited Mole God in Anzrag the Quake-Mole. So when I heard we were getting a Mole God in this set, I figured, okay, it's gonna be some like janky meme card, and it turns out that, well, the flavor of Anzrag is, I guess, kind of a janky meme card, but the card itself is actually like legit scary, and I think super powerful, and maybe even a little power creepy. So Anzrag the Quake-Mole is a 4-mana 8/4 legendary Gruul creature. Its ability is, whenever it becomes blocked, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there's an additional combat phase. Notice there's no restriction there, so if it gets blocked in the additional combat phase, you can do it again and again and again until your opponent's board is wrathed or until you win the game, and then you can pay 7 to make it so it must be blocked each combat this turn of Fable. So Anzrag, we've seen many creatures in Magic's past that give you additional combat steps, Morag, Hellkite Charger, Scourge of Thrones, and there's many more, but Anzrag is unique for 3 reasons. So first, it's a legend, so you can play it as your commander. I know Morag is too, but being legendary, pretty big deal. In commander, you're always going to have access to this card. Second, it's only 4 mana, so it's a lot cheaper than many of these other options. Third, out of all these additional combat creatures, I think Anzrag might be the easiest or one of the easiest to go infinite or like pseudo-infinite with. So Anzrag, the other reason just to be hyped about this is its stats are kind of off the chart. So an 8/4 for 4, traditionally in Magic means a huge drawback, like Hunted Troll, a 4-mana 8/4, but you gotta give an opponent 4 1/1 flyers. Either that or it costs like 8 mana like Crash of Rhinos. So just the fact that these stats exist is already kind of wild on a creature that doesn't have a drawback. So what do you do with Anzrag? And the answer is really 2 things. There's 2 things you gotta do to make this card really good. Maybe 3 if you're playing it in standard, but number 1 is you gotta make sure your opponent's blocking it. So in 60 card formats, I guess it doesn't matter too much because it's an 8/4, so you get this down and you swing with it. If your opponent blocks it, you're like, okay, extra combat, get in with all my other creatures again. If your opponent doesn't block it, then they're taking at least 8 to the face, which is kind of a ton of damage. So in standard, it doesn't really matter, but in commander, I think you really want to make sure that your opponent's blocking this. So anything that can make your opponent block this, lure, irresistible prey, enlarge, is going to be pretty good with Anzrag. I know you can do it with its ability, but that's really a backup plan just because 7 mana is so much. You'd rather do it at a cheaper rate with one of these cards. The second thing Anzrag wants is to be indestructible. If you can put a lure on this and use like a Darksteel Plate or a Mithril Coat to make it indestructible, honestly, you probably just win the game. So all your opponent's stuff is going to have to block Anzrag every time, but it's not going to die because it's indestructible. So essentially you'd get infinite combats where your opponent just has to keep blocking this. All of your other stuff is getting in for damage. So one of 2 things will happen. Either your opponent just literally dies because they run out of life, or eventually Anzrag is like this weird plague wind that eats away all of your opponent's creatures. And then you wrath their board. You don't quite get in enough damage before your opponent loses all their blockers to be able to kill your opponent. But you're still in amazing shape, right? Because your opponent's got no creatures, you dealt a ton of damage, you got this indestructible Anzrag. So that's kind of the main thing you want to do with this. The best news is there's 2 cards I could find that do both of these in one. And these are your like ultra staples if you're building Anzrag Commander. Roar the Challenge and You Look Upon the Terex. So either of these cards not only makes it so everything has to block Anzrag, but it also makes it indestructible, which means if you have a few other creatures on the battlefield and your opponent has some blockers, either one of these cards with a non-summoning stick Anzrag probably just going to win you the game, as we were talking about. In Standard, this is where it gets a little sketchy. I am fully convinced that Anzrag is going to be one of the most popular commanders from the set and be very, very scary and strong in some sort of like Gruul, aggro-y, lure-y commander deck. In Standard, I think you really want to give it haste. That's the biggest deal with this card. So I'm envisioning some sort of like Gruul aggro, Gruul mid-range deck. You got stuff like Rabbit Battery, Goro Goro, Reckless Stormseeker, Invigorating Hot Springs, where you just play like efficient Gruul creatures, and then you top it off with a hasty Anzrag. You swing in, your opponent's either going to take the hit and probably die from Anzrag hitting them for at least 8, maybe more if you're pumping with Stormseeker or whatever, or they block it, all your other stuff's going to get a bunch of damage, you get an extra combat, you do it again, and that probably kills your opponent anyway. So I actually think that Anzrag is like an absurd top-end threat for some sort of like Gruul stompy deck in Standard, especially if you can build your deck to give it haste. So Anzrag, very much not a meme. Well, very much a meme because it's a mole god, but actually a very strong card that I think we're going to be seeing a lot of in Commander, and maybe even some in Standard, because 4 mana 4/8 is such ridiculous stats on a creature with so many upsides. We also got the best card in the set so far, and I don't even think it's really close, in Archdruid's Charm. So Archdruid's Charm, the green version of Archmage's Charm, I don't know, maybe this is the start of like a super cycle that goes across sets, which would be really cool. I'd love to see what like the white version look like or the black version look like. So Wizards, if you're watching this, keep making these charms because they're really good. So Archdruid's Charm, 3 green mana instant. And the 3 green mana, that's like the only real drawback of this card is you do need to be heavy green to cast it. If you can meet that threshold though, this card is wild. So you choose one of, search your library for a creature or land card, reveal it, put it on the battlefield tapped if it's a land, otherwise put it into your hand, or you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, or you can exile target artifact or enchantment. If you think about what this card is, it's essentially like a bite effect, so like bite down or whatever, an okay removal spell. It's nice that it's biting rather than fighting, so your creature doesn't take damage, into a souped up naturalize that exiles, which is relevant against stuff like the One Ring, so a fade into antiquity. The most exciting part of this though is that first mode. Its foundational mode is its tutoring mode, so this is a Eladrami's Call for 1 more mana, or most importantly, the new cheapest non-basic land tutor in Magic. So if you think about tutoring not just a basic land, but any land on the battlefield, Crop Rotation does it for 1 mana instant speed, but you have to sack a land to do it. Otherwise, you're looking mostly at like Tempwood Discovery at 4 mana. I guess Wargate kind of does it in a weird way for 3 mana, but this is 3 mana instant speed, tutor any land onto the battlefield, and it has all these extra upsides. This card is almost never going to be bad. Worst case, you just tutor up your best land. Best case, you get some extra value out of it and get a like super sweet creature or remove something with it. I think this card, if you can cast it, is kind of just a staple. So oddly, I actually think that Standard is the format where this card is weakest for 2 reasons. First, green kind of sucks in Standard, and this does have 3 green mana symbols, so you're not only going to be green, but you're going to be heavy green. This isn't a card you can realistically splash, I don't think. The other reason it's like kind of okay in Standard is I think the most powerful thing this card does is tutor up a non-basic land to instant speed, and the options in Standard just aren't that great. I guess you can get like Pits of Offering for instant speed graveyard hate, Cavern of Souls, I guess, to protect against counters, maybe a creature land. Once you get back to older formats though, that's where this card really shines. So like in Timeless, there's this mono green Primeval Titan Field of the Dead deck. Archdruid's Charm seems like the new best card in this deck. For 3 mana, you can get your Field of the Dead at instant speed even, or if you don't want your Field of the Dead or don't need it, you can just tutor up your Primeval Titan and play it the next turn, and it answers the One Ring, and it can be a removal spell. It's kind of ridiculous. And then once you get to like Pioneer Modern Legacy, this finds Nykthos and Mono Green. It finds Lotus Field and Lotus Field combo. It finds Urza's Saga, all the Tron lands, Valakut, Dark Depths, Thespian Stage. The list of things is fine, is utterly ridiculous. And then in Commander, I think this might be the new best Ram spell in the literal entire format. Again, assuming that 3 green mana is not a deal breaker, it is a harsh mana cost, but there's some awesome tricks with this in Commander, where this for 3 mana instant speed can get like Glacial Chasm, a land that makes it so all damage dealt to is reduced to 0. So you wait till your opponent Alpha strikes you, and then you just Archdruid's Charm, get Glacial Chasm, fizzle the damage. It's almost like green Teferi's protection in that context. You can get a Bajuka Bog to fizzle someone's big, Rise of the Dark Realms combo turn at instant speed. It is an absurd card. So Archdruid's Charm, I love the callback to Archmage's Charm. More importantly, this is just a ridiculously powerful card. I've seen some people kind of down on the power level of this set, but this card is so incredibly strong that I think it makes up for any, perceived deficiencies in power with the rest of the set. We also got Kylox's Voltcharger, which is kind of a funny one. When I first saw this card, I was like, wow, that's a really sweet design. I bet this card's pretty good. And then I read it a few more times, and I was like, wow, this is a really sweet design, but this card probably kind of sucks. So Kylox's Voltcharger, 3 mana mythic vehicle. It's a 4/4. It can be crewed for 2. It also has Collect Evidence 6. It becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So you can turn it into a creature either by crewing 2 or exiling at least 6 mana value worth of stuff for your graveyard. And then it has an ability that when it attacks, you can cast an instant sorcery spell from among the exiled cards with it. If a spell cast this way would be put in the graveyard, put it on the bottom of your library instead. So Kylox's Voltcharger reminds me a little bit of like Ethereal Forager, Dreadhorde Arcanist. There's some hoops you gotta jump through to make it work, right? So first off, a 3 mana 4/4 vehicle with crew 2, stone unplayable. No chance, no evasion. That card is not even close to being good enough to see play. So if you're going to put this in your deck, it's because you're going to be able to fill your graveyard, collect instants and sorceries as evidence, and then cast those with Voltcharger, similar to like Dreadhorde Arcanist or something. But that does mean you need to be able to get a lot of mana value worth of cards into your graveyard quickly. And it's also worth mentioning, I saw some confusion on this, you still have to pay the mana cost with the cards you cast with Voltcharger. So just like I cycle my Lorenz Revealed, I exile it, I cast it with Voltcharger, yeah, that's fine, but you're still gonna have to pay 5 mana for the Lorenz Revealed or whatever. It's not as exciting as you might think. Or like, I imagine people being like, pitch my Magma Opus, make a treasure, Voltcharger it, get you. You get me if you got 8 mana, but you still gotta spend the mana on it. So that does kind of keep it in check. So you need to be a deck that can fill the graveyard with spells and can get in with this vehicle repeatedly. I guess there's some like snowball potential in the right context. I guess the dream is, if you've ever seen a Dreadhorde Arcanist deck go off, the dream is that you can do something like kind of similar with Voltcharger, where you like cast a removal spell, kill something, collect evidence it into the Voltcharger, then attack with the Voltcharger, cast it, go further to throw it again, get rid of the blocker, keep getting in with Voltcharger, keep snowballing the value. But I feel like that's going to be hard to do repeatedly. So you need 6 mana value worth of spells. Once you use a spell, it goes away. And then the next turn, you're either going to have 6 more mana value worth of spells, which is probably a challenge, or you're going to have a creature to crew it with and use whatever spells you had exiled from the first evidence collection. So I feel like, yes, it could be snowballed, but in practice, it's actually going to be really hard to make it work. Then I was like, okay, I'm really hyped about this Melek deck. I really want to build Melek in Standard. I could play it there, right? Melek wants a bunch of spells in the graveyard. That seems perfect. The thing is, if I'm playing Melek, I kind of want my spells in the graveyard, so I'm not sure I want to collect evidence them all the way to my Voltcharger, even if it means I get to Snapcaster them back into play. So there's actually kind of a bit of a non-bow in some ways with some of the like graveyard spell decks, because you don't really want to be exiling all those spells. Sure, you could like turn it into a creature with a mech hanger or play it in a vehicle deck, but in a vehicle deck it's not very good because your vehicle deck isn't going to have a bunch of instants or sorceries in the graveyard to flesh back. So all this to say, Kylox's Voltcharger, it's a really sweet design, and I really like this card. I just don't see a home for it. Even in Commander, vehicle decks are not in the right colors for this. The popular ones, at least, are like in Azorius or in Boros, so you can't really play Voltcharger there. And then I guess you could play in a Spellslinger deck, but I'm kind of skeptical that this card's actually strong enough to show up in Hilo or Viran or Mizzix or whatever. I think it's just not quite powerful enough when you have so many good support cards anyway. So I think that Kylox's Voltcharger might be one of those awkward cards that's a really cool, flavorful design and super unique. I love to see Wizards branching out, trying new things with vehicles, but just doesn't actually really have a home to make it work. If it was like 2 mana, maybe I could see some arguments for like Pioneer or Modern is like a weird vehicle-y Dreadhorde Arcanist, but as it is at 3 mana and not having any evasion, and that's the other problem we didn't get into too much. We talked about it a little bit with the snowballing, but this is a 4/4 ground creature that needs to keep attacking every turn to really generate value. Can you do that in a world of Sheoldreds and so forth? Again, the dream is you like snowball the removal spells to keep clearing the way for this, but a lot of times you're not going to be able to do this, and then this just chump attacks into a Sheoldred and you cast one spell and you got to spend mana on it and it dies. So I think that Voltcharger, awesome design. As far as actually seeing play, though, might not be quite good enough anywhere. We also got a new Lazav in Lazav, Wearer of Faces. So 2 mana Dimir, legendary shapeshifter detective. It's a 2/3. When it attacks, you exile target card from a graveyard and then investigate. And then whenever you sack a clue, you can have Lazav become a copy of a creature card exiled with it until end of turn. So Lazav, it feels like Lazav. I will give it that for sure. All of our previous Lazavs somehow turn themselves into things from the graveyard. That's kind of the whole gimmick of Lazav. The other thing about Lazavs is they've never actually really been playable constructed cards, and I'm afraid new Lazav might kind of be the same way. So a 2 mana 2/3, it's fine. We see that with like Dennick in Standard, sees a lot of play as a legendary 2-color, 2 mana 2/3. The thing about Lazav though, is for it to do anything, it needs to be able to attack. And it's not always that easy for a 2/3 to attack. So for you to ever turn this into another creature, you gotta attack at least once to exile a card from the graveyard. You need there to be a creature in the graveyard, and then you're gonna need the additional hoop of sacrificing a clue to actually turn it into the creature. And then even if you do that, it only becomes a copy of the creature until end of turn. So at the end of turn, you turn it into something sweet and spicy or whatever, it's gonna go back to just being a Lazav, and then you need to like attack again probably, or at least make another clue to sacrifice to be able to start the process over. So I think that Lazav, there's a dream. There's like this ultra meme kill that I love. So the dream with Lazav is you like turn 1 Entomb, put a Phage into the graveyard. Turn 2 you play Lazav. Turn 3 make Lazav unblockable with Escape Tunnel, and then you crack the clue, turn Lazav into Phage, attack, win the game on the spot. You don't die to Phage's trigger because Lazav's already on the battlefield. So that's the dream of the card if you're like building it in Commander. Plus it is worth mentioning that you can sack a clue however you want to. You don't have to necessarily sack it for 2 mana to draw a card. You could sack a clue to Oni Cold Anvil, let's say, and still get Lazav's ability to turn into something else. The problem I see with the card though is it's a 2-drop that has to be able to keep attacking, or at least getting some attacks to really do anything. And the decks that could want this already have some pretty good 2-drops. Like, is this beating out Dennick and Deep Cavern Bat and Fairy Mastermind in the Esper style decks, the Dimir style decks? I lean towards no. I think like it's just too many hoops to jump through. Yes, if you can keep attacking with this and it's making a clue every turn, that's actually pretty good value on a 2-drop. But can you keep doing that with Lazav? Is it actually realistic in our current Standard to be able to keep attacking with it? I'm guessing the answer is mostly no, although it does synergize pretty well with like Rafine Schemings here. So maybe this could be like a 1 of in Esper Legends or a 2 of in Esper Legends. I don't think it's bad by any means. I just don't think it's like that exciting. The other thing worth mentioning about this card is, so Lazav turns into a copy of a card that it exiles, but Lazav will already be on the battlefield, so you're not going to get any ETB triggers. So Lazav is really going to be at its best, turning into like things with attack triggers like Cityscape Leveler or Rafine, rather than things that have ETB triggers or need to stick on the battlefield like Sheoldred to get value, because remember, it only turns into that thing until end of turn. So Lazav, it's a nice little flavorful card. It feels like a Lazav, so I like that aspect of it. I could see this showing up as like a 1 of or a 2 of in an Esper Legends deck, but I think its ability is actually going to be a little bit tricky to snowball. On the other hand, the like turn 3 Phage killing Commander is kind of hilarious, and I'm going to try to pull that off. We also got a pretty wild artifact creature in Barbed Servitor. So Barbed Servitor, 4 mana, 1/1 artifact creature. It's a black card. It has indestructible. When it ETBs, it's suspected, which means it has menace and can't block, which is actually kind of a big issue for this card. When it deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card, and whenever it is dealt damage, target opponent loses that much life. So this is one of the weirder cards we've seen in a while. So it's kind of like this weird stuffy doll mixed with like a Shadow Mage Infiltrator. The problem I see with Barbed Servitor is the fact that it is suspected, which means it can't block. The easiest way to take advantage of a stuffy doll is just play it and have it sit back on defense and be like, you can't really attack me, because if you do, you're going to hit my Stuffy Doll, it's going to damage you a bunch. Barbed Servitor, because it's suspected, is kind of like an aggro Stuffy Doll. It's a Stuffy Doll, but you need to attack with it every single turn. And your opponent's going to have the choice. Okay, do I let this hit me and you get to draw a card and lose a life? Or do I block this? If I block it, it's going to take damage. Then I'm going to take damage Stuffy Doll style equal to the power of my creature that I blocked it with. So it's like a Stuffy Doll that wants to attack every turn. Or you have to find a way to get rid of the suspect on it. If you can make it unsus, then it turns into like a better Stuffy Doll. And there are a couple cards that do this. I don't know how realistic this is. It might be playing bad cards to make a bad card better or whatever, but like Deadly Complication, 3 mana, you can choose one or both to destroy a creature or put a counter on a suspected creature you control, and it's no longer suspected. Airtight Alibi can get rid of a creature being suspected. So I guess you could try to like combo this and turn it into a real boy. So that could be a possibility. Obviously, just like Stuffy Doll, combos with big damage spells like Blasphemous Act, you hit this for 13, you throw 13 at your opponent. Star of Extinction, you hit it for 20, you throw 20 at your opponent. In Commander, I think its best home's probably Piru, actually. Piru likes Stuffy Doll effects, and Barbed Servitor, it's in its colors, so if your commander dies, it's going to deal 7 damage to the Barbed Servitor, which will then deal 7 damage to your opponent. I'm very curious what people think about this card. My guess is, if 4 mana, and in a world where Sunfall, Farewell, exile-based wraths exist, I'm guessing it's probably like an against the odds meme style card. The idea of this like Stuffy Doll that has to attack because it can't block and punishes your opponent if they block it by giving them damage, or if they don't block it by letting you draw a card, it's a really, really cool idea. And I love Stuffy Doll effects. I just worry that it doesn't really line up with what's going on in Standard, because Indestructible is like not a very relevant piece of text when so much of the popular removal in the format just exiles things, which kind of kills the whole design of this card. So I feel like this is a super sweet card, actually one of my favorite designs from the whole set. In another Standard format, it might actually be kind of exciting. As it is, I just don't know if it lines up well enough with the top tier of the meta. We also got Blood Splatter Analysis, so a Rakdos enchantment, a black and a red. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to target creature an opponent controls, and then whenever one or more creatures die, you mill a card and put a Bloodstain counter on it, then sacrifice it if it has 5 or more Bloodstain counters on it. When you do, you could return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So that is a lot of text to essentially play an Oath of Chandra that mills you a bit and eventually lets you raise dead. The question is Blood Splatter Analysis good enough? And I would say I'm really on the fence on this one. So as a removal spell, it's worse than the other options, right? It's only 3 damage, it only hits a creature, and for the same amount of mana, you could be Go for the Throating anything. You could be a Braiding that can hit artifacts, Infernal Grasp, Molten Collapse. There's so many strong Rakdos removal spells at 2 mana in Standard right now that 3 damage at sorcery speed is not that exciting. So if this is going to be good enough, the second mode, the sitting out on the battlefield, filling your graveyard, eventually giving you a creature back from the graveyard, I think that's going to have to be the big selling point. So I think that means it could work in specific decks, right? If you're really interested in filling your graveyard to reanimate something with Cruelty of Gix or Urborg Lurglives or Melix or whatever, then this kind of goes up in value. It's going to end up being 3 damage to something, and then eventually you mill 5 cards and get something back from your graveyard. That's a fine little bit of value. The other possibility of this card is you're sacrificing it for value before you ever get the last mode. So we've seen like Oath of Chandra style effects or Oath of Kaya show up a lot in Doom Foretold style decks. Doom Foretold just wants useless permanents on the battlefield to sacrifice. So you can Blood Splatter Analysis, hopefully kill one of your opponent's things, cash it into Doom Foretold to keep the Doom Foretold going. In Standard, we even have like Braids, kind of like enchantments you can sacrifice to drain your opponent and draw some cards. Enigmatic Incarnation also really fits in this plan in a format like Pioneer, maybe Historic. So that's another option there. So I think there are homes for this card. My question is it good enough in a generic deck? That's where I'm really unsure. I'm leaning towards No, but then I think about it, I'm like, okay, I play this, I kill an early game creature, it just sits out for a few turns, and eventually in my, like, Rakdos mid-range deck, I get back a Trumpeting Carnosaur, or a Shieldred, or a Preacher of the Schism. Actually, maybe that's fine. Like, maybe it's worth playing a power down removal spell, just because eventually I'm gonna get, like, some really busted creature back from my graveyard to my hand for free. So let me know what you think. Obviously, I think if you're Doom Foretolding, or, Braidsing or something, this card's gonna be really, really good. What about, like, Rakdos Midrange, one of the best decks in Standard right now? Is this good enough to make the cut? Does the fact that its removal mode is kind of underpowered kill it? Does the fact that you get a creature back from your graveyard, does that make it so worth it in a relatively grindy format? Really curious your analysis of the Blood Spatter analysis, so let me know what you think about it in the comments. Finally today, in the world of lower rarity cards, there's only really one that's important, and that is Slime Against Humanity. So Slime Against Humanity, 3 mana common green sorcery. It says create a 0/0 ooze creature token with trample, and put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is 2 plus the total number of cards you own in exile and in your graveyard that are oozes or are named Slime Against Humanity, and a deck can have any number of cards named Slime Against Humanity. So if you think about how this card works, you cast the first one, you get a 2/2 with trample, right? The second one, though, you're gonna have one in your graveyard, so you're gonna be able to get a 3/3 with trample. Then the next one is going to be a 4/4 with trample. So they keep snowballing the more you cast. These cards, players love them. We now have 6 total cards in Magic that let you play any number in your deck. We started with Relentless Rats like 20 years ago, but then we've gotten Shadowborn Apostle, Rat Colony, Persistent Petitioners, Dragon's Approach. These cards are all commons, and if you look at the prices of them, they're usually worth $3 a piece, $4 a piece, because if you're going to build a deck with these, you're going to put like 40 of them in your deck or whatever. So this is the first time we've seen a green version of this card, and it's actually like pretty good. This is obviously not going to be a top tier standard deck or anything. The idea of I play, 36 of these and I just cast one every turn, I don't think that's going to lead to you winning the game. At least it's never worked with any of the previous versions of this card. But there are cool shenanigans with this. If you're building this in Commander, obviously, like with any of these any number cards, Thrumming Stone is like the best combo piece. It's going to actually be kind of hilarious. I want to build Commander a deck that is Eve Progenitor Ooze as my commander, like 45 Slime Against Humanities, Thrumming Stone, and hopefully a way to tutor it up, which I haven't figured out yet. But if you can cast a Slime Against Humanity with a Thrumming Stone out, Thrumming Stone gives your spells Ripple 4, which means when you cast a spell, you reveal the top 4 cards of your library, and you can cast any spells that have the same name as the first spell you cast. So if you have like 40 Slime Against Humanities in your deck, these are just going to keep chaining together. You should be able to play your entire deck's worth, and the last one, the 40th one, is going to be making, what, like a 42 Trampler or something? And then you have Ave is your commander, which has Storm, and it cares about all these Slimes Against Humanity that you cast. When it ETBs, you're going to make 1 million copies of Ave, they're going to get 1 million counters because you got 1 million oozes. It's going to be hilarious. I don't think this deck is good, but it's a great meme commander deck that, depending on the price of Slime Against Humanity, might be pretty cheap to put together. Like, all you really need is Ave, Slime, and Thrumming Stone, and a bunch of lands, and you're good to go. So I'm actually really hyped about this card. I'm sure we'll play it in Standard too, but it seems like a really funny meme commander deck. Otherwise, we got a bunch of draft stuff. You can see it all over at MTGPreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Murders at Karlov Manor spoilers for today. So, what do you think? Oh man, Archdruid's Charm. How busted is that? What about the Mole God? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back tomorrow, or maybe Monday, depending on how many spoilers we get, with even more Murders at Karlov Manor spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, you can check out yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe the Against the Odds, where we tried to combo off with Intruder Alarm in Timeless.